Hello, I'm Sierra Scott. Welcome to It's All Good. This is a show dedicated to people, places, companies, and organizations that are working hard to make the world a better place to live. A Wichita woman's story is in the latest edition of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books. It's not just that her story made it into the book, which is a miracle in itself, but it's how it made it into the book that makes the story even more inspiring. We recently traveled to Denver to talk with the book's author to find out what made Lynn Gilkey's story stand out. What went through your head when they said, you're going to be in the next Chicken Soup book?
I felt like I had won the lottery. It was just, I was so excited. And I think I ran around my house a couple of laps.
We'll tell you Lynn's story here in just a minute, but first we want you to hear how it made it into the book. Leanne Tiemann is the book's co-author.
There's always a message of hope in every Chicken Soup for the Soul story.
How do stories get chosen? Who picks what goes into the books?
Ultimately, I do. I read about 2,000 stories for each book.
Of those 2,000, only 101 make it in, and it's not a quick process either.
It usually takes me about a year to read all 2,000 stories, then a year to put the book together. But the God thing about this is the book was done, pretty much done. I had chosen my top 101.
Or so she thought. At that point, Lynn's story was not in the book. In fact, Leanne hadn't even heard about it yet. Then during a phone conversation, one of Leanne's friends happened to tell her about Lynn.
And I said, wait, stop the presses. I want to hear that story.
So Lynn did her best to tell it.
And I said, well, I'm not a writer. And I just went into a quiet space and put the pen to the paper, and things just started flowing and memories, and I just did it.
What made you choose Lynn's story?
I said I was looking for stories that were unique and had a different message, and hers certainly was. One of tremendous courage, and talk about a woman of Renaissance. To turn your life around for yourself and your children is one thing, but then to take that even further and help other women and be such a gift to the world, that was just an absolute perfect Chicken Soup for the Soul story. It really was.
In order to include Lynn's story, Leanne had to pull another story out of the book, which was no easy feat. Lynn says she's just thrilled her story was one of them.
For me, I always think, what would my legacy be? And to me, that's my story. And so it's not only for the public, I think it's just really, it's really inspirational that I would be leaving something for my kids and their kids and their kids. So that's what it means to me. It's just like my legacy.
Now, when you were going through this, did it ever enter your mind that someday you would be an inspiration for people?
No, not at all. Not at all, Sierra. I thought, why me for a while? Why me? And then I thought, after it was all over, I was just blessed that that experience occurred, because now I'm able to help so many other people with my story. So now I just realize it's not about me. It's really not about me. It's about helping others. It's an honor. It's no other way to put it. It's just an honor that, you know, that God has chosen me to do the work that I do. And now I get it now. I couldn't do this without the experience. And so now I embrace, you know, now it's more, I can accept what happened. I can truly accept what happened because it was for another purpose. You know.
So what do you get out of writing the Chicken Soup books?
If you can imagine reading, most recently, 2,000 miracle stories and 2,000 stories of answered prayer. I mean, that just blesses me. And each book teaches me something. And I walk away with my own personal lesson that I learned from reading all those stories. So I'm blessed over and over again from the privilege of being able to read and select and rewrite them.
After reading Lynn's story, Leanne says she took away a very powerful message.
You're not dictated by your past, and you can change it. And then share it with the world, absolutely. You know, there have been hardships, as there are in anybody's life, but from any hardship I learned and gained, and who knows that better than Lynn Gilkey and her story.
Right after the break, we'll tell you the story that got Lynn into the book, and you'll see why Leanne stopped the presses to include it. You're watching It's All Good. Before the break, we told you how a Wichita woman's story came to be included in a Chicken Soup for the Soul book on answered prayers. Now here's Lynn to tell you what she went through that inspired her to make sure other women don't go down that same path.
I am a survivor. I'm not a victim.
If you're one of those people who don't think people can change, you're in for a real awakening. It's hard to tell by meeting her now, but just 7 years ago, Lynn Gilkey was a crack cocaine addict.
I started using gateway drugs like nicotine and marijuana and in my teens, like 12. At the age of 24, I was introduced to crack cocaine, and I was immediately addicted. When the addiction took over, I didn't want to work. I couldn't work. I was consumed. The thought of getting more consumed my every waking moment.
Since she wasn't working, Lynn needed to find another way to pay for her drugs, so she began selling.
My house ended up getting raided, and which was a blessing. I look at it now, and it was truly a blessing.
Now, a lot of people end up going to jail or their house is raided and whatever, and they don't change. They come back and they are the same as they were before. They just pick up where they left off. What in you changed?
My children. I think I know. When they raided my house, my daughter, my youngest, she was 6 months, and realizing that I may not see her until she's an adult. And I was looking at a 15 to life sentence, and in that jail cell, I just surrendered, and I made a commitment to my Lord to change my life, and if He would allow me to get out of that situation that I was in, that I would use my life experience to help other women.
How many times had you gotten in trouble and gone right back?
Sarah, I can't even count. I had gotten arrested before, and I was in the back of the police car, and I would say, Lord, if you get me out of this situation, I'll change. But it was something about that situation that my heart was different. I had a sincere heart.
Throughout this interview, what impressed me most was the fact that Lynn takes responsibility for her actions and refuses to blame anyone or anything for what happened in her life. And just so you know, it was a tough life, one you need to know about to understand what it took for her to overcome and succeed. Lynn was one of 8 children who was born to a woman who died during childbirth.
My mother passed away when I was 3. We had to go live with a family member, an extended family member. And there is where the abuse started. It started there, and it continued. It continued for years.
7 years, to be exact. Lynn was 10 when her father remarried and brought her and her brothers and sisters home again. As if being abused wasn't bad enough, after returning home, Lynn was raped. Then, years later, Lynn found herself in front of a judge. Despite the fact that she faced 15 years to life in prison, Lynn says the judge ended up sentencing her to 18 months probation instead.
I knew it was a blessing, and I knew it was my opportunity to change my life.
And change her life she has. With the help of organizations like Dress for Success, Lynn has put all of that behind her.
Hi. I'm Karen.
Dress for Success has just been a blessing. They saw some leadership skills in me that at the time my self-esteem was really low. I couldn't see past my situation, let alone see anything good about myself.
Dress for Success provides more than just clothes, although that is part of the program. The organization also gives these women important life skills.
Over here and right along here.
Yeah, I'm about in the 18. Dress for Success taught me some business etiquette and resume building and interviewing skills, and I was able to connect with other women that had difficulties in their lives, and we networked and we encouraged each other.
After taking part in the program, Dress for Success sent Lynn to a Success Summit meeting in Washington, D.C.
At that summit, something sparked inside of me and something began to grow, which was self-confidence and self-esteem, and I was able to see beyond my past.
Since taking part in the Dress for Success professional women's group, Lynn has made good on that promise she made to God while in that jail cell so many years ago.
Went back to school. I went to Butler Community College and I received my certification in drug and alcohol counseling.
Today, Lynn is a successful advocate for the Regional Prevention Center, where she counsels teens about the consequences of doing drugs. Although Lynn has turned her life around, the journey has not been easy.
What was the hardest part for you, having to change your lifestyle?
I think the hardest part has been my children. I think that I know that during my addiction, I was not emotionally there for them. I was consumed. I was selfish. And I think that that damaged them in some way. So rebuilding that relationship with my kids, it has been difficult.
And since she's a convicted felon,
it's been difficult finding jobs. I know I've changed. I know I'm forgiven. But it takes a while for society, I think, to kind of look at felons in a different aspect. But I don't let that hold me back. That's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. I just keep going.
Lynn says she's learned a lot along the way. One of the major lessons was the power of forgiveness, which she has even extended to the man who raped her.
I had an opportunity to face that young man again, and I was able to forgive him because I knew that in order for me to move on, to move forward with my life, I had to forgive because I had done things in my life that I needed someone to forgive me for. So how can I not forgive, and how can I ask someone to forgive me?
Lynn says she was also able to forgive the person who abused her as a child.
It was only through the grace of God that I was able to do that. If it had not been for that whole episode in my life, I may still be using drugs.
Now, instead of being consumed by drugs, Lynn is consumed with.
My mission is just to give back to other women that have went through similar situations. Who better can understand their pain than someone that's been through the situation?
And someone who's come out better on the other side.
I had to look at my life and my situation as not in vain. It didn't go in vain. And what people meant for bad, God was able to turn that around into something good.
And it is good.
And I go to treatment centers and I go to homeless shelters and I talk to women and anybody that'll listen. That if I can do it, anybody can do it.
Since we filed this story, Lynn has gone on to create a charity that she hopes will change the world one girl at a time.
When I was incarcerated in the Sedgwick County Detention Facility, I had time to have some deep conversations with God. And one of the things that, and I know we're not supposed to bargain with God, but one of the things that I had said was that if I was given another opportunity to be free, that I would give back, that I would dedicate my life to helping young girls not go down the same path I did.
Her charity is called CLASS, which stands for Caring Ladies Assisting Students to Succeed.
It is a mentoring program for teenage girls. Our mission is to educate, motivate, and encourage teenage girls to graduate high school, choose healthy lifestyle behaviors. It started out with 8 young girls, and next thing you know, there's 61 girls that's enrolled in the program. So it's been an exciting road.
Lynn takes these women on college tours, exposes them to the arts, and provides them with a place to talk about topics like healthy relationships.
Now, what do they have to do to stay in the group?
Well, they have to maintain at least a 2.0, but you don't have to have that coming into the program. We have girls that have very low GPAs, and we encourage them. We set them up with tutoring, and we just encourage them to bring those grades up so that they can graduate on time.
The program has been around since 2008, and Lynn says they've had a lot of success stories since then.
And the wonderful thing is, some of these girls never thought about seeing themselves walking down college halls. But exposing them to college, you know, they think, well, yeah, I can do that.
Lynn says she has 40 girls who went through her program in college right now.
The wonderful thing about it is, now they come back on spring break, they come back to Wichita and they're like, Miss Lynn, I want to help. What can I do? So that's what they do.
Oh, that just gives me chills.
It works. It works.
Coming up after the break on It's All Good, we'll tell you the story behind the woman who decided to include Lynn's story. Leanne Tieman's story was actually featured in a Chicken Soup book as well, and it's going to inspire you too. Stay with us. While Lynn's story is extremely inspirational, the author of the book she's in, Leanne Tieman, has a pretty amazing story herself. A story that began almost 40 years ago, but keeps changing the world to this very day.
How did you start writing these books in the first place?
My own true story got in Chicken Soup for the Mother's Soul. It's just such a remarkable, moving, unbelievable story. As I tell it, I can hardly believe that it happened the way it did.
Leanne's story began back in 1975.
I was accidentally caught up, and I say accidentally, in Operation Baby Lift. I was a volunteer for an organization. I was an Iowa farm wife and a woman at the time, and I volunteered for Friends of Children of Vietnam. And my basement was the Iowa chapter headquarters.
The group sent supplies to war orphans in Vietnam.
And then they asked me if I would go to Vietnam and escort 6 babies back to their adoptive homes in the United States. But incredibly, between the time I said yes and the time I arrived there, the war raged close to the city. Bombs were dropping outside of the city limits of Saigon. And when I landed at Tan Son Nhut Air Force Base, I was greeted with, President Ford, okay, Operation Baby Lift. You're not going to help take out 6 babies, you'll help take out 300. And I was whisked into something that was completely over my head. We had people bringing babies in from other orphanages, from the streets, and this orphanage center that normally housed maybe a dozen or so children had 200 or 300 babies in it at one point in time. We had some children in foster homes, and those foster mothers came to help us. And it was just amazing how well all of those babies were cared for. And I was only there for 5 days before we began Operation Baby Lift, and within a week all 300 were evacuated to the United States.
But Leanne didn't really realize what she'd accomplished until she returned back home to Iowa.
And honestly, it wasn't until I got home that night and fell into Mark's arms that it really could all come just washing over me of, oh my gosh, what was I just a part of? And I did it. And not only did I live through it, but wonderful things happened from it. Because in the midst of this, the little boy that we were hoping to adopt in 2 years crawled into my arms and our family. We have a son.
20 years later, she decided the story needed to be told. The story was called This Must Be My Brother.
And that story, actually, after 21 rejections, got sold on the 22nd option to a publisher. That sort of launched, unexpectedly, my writing career.
Leanne wasn't a writer. She was a nurse at the time, so she bought some books and started teaching herself to write.
I took every writing course and class and mentorship and retreat and workshop and magazine to learn how to write. When I learned how to write stories, to write my own story about being a part of Operation Baby Lift, I began writing everybody else's stories, submitting them to Chicken Soup books.
These stories can be found in 11 other Chicken Soup books. After noticing how well she wrote, Chicken Soup then asked Leanne to co-author Chicken Soup for the Nurse's Soul.
That book hit number 17 on the New York Times bestseller list, thanks to the wonderful nurses, and that made Chicken Soup happy. So they offered me many more titles after that.
12 entire books, that is, and a writing career was born.
I would never have imagined this, or even imagined or prayed for it, or had a goal to be this in my life. And yet now I know it's exactly my life assignment. So humbling, really, that I could help create the words that can touch a person's life like they tell me and change their life. So what a privilege that is, and what a blessing it is to me, and what a big responsibility. And so I take it very seriously. And
Leanne is also a professional speaker that gives 20 to 30 speeches a year. In addition to the 12 Chicken Soup books, she's written 3 of her own. Another interesting part to the story is that Leanne's husband Mark had decided to retire and was preparing to slow down when things for Lynn started taking off.
When I gave my very first speech here in Fort Collins, and my name was on the marquee outside of the Lincoln Center, the local theater, and Mark came and heard me speak the first time. And I wasn't very good probably then, but he said then, we were packing everything in the car, and he said, "Honey, the world will be a better place the more they hear you speak."
Oh my gosh, what
and
a
he
blessing.
went right behind me.
Wow. That's amazing to have that kind of support. What a blessing.
And he's had to really change his life expectations and all as well.
Absolutely.
But he believes, too, that I'm on a divine assignment of some kind, and he's a part of that.
Leanne has now told her story all over the world. So what happened to those 300 babies that were evacuated?
Here's the best part. On the 25th anniversary of Operation Baby Lift, there were 2 reunions, and I actually got to go stand before, each time, 100 young men and women, many of whom I brought out. It was just phenomenal to see them today. I'll never forget there was one baby on the plane that had a cleft palate, and I couldn't remember how long it took. You know, I'm trying to feed 3 babies at a time on my lap and on my shoulder and so forth, and here's this little baby just crying her eyes out. So I had to put 3 babies down to pick her up, and with her cleft palate, she had to just have tiny little sips at a time. And I'll never forget that moment. And I got to the reunion, and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "I know you." And I turned around and saw her repaired cleft palate. And it was amazing. And then I told them their story and showed them their pictures. And then they took the microphone and told me theirs. And so it was just an incredible, moving, blessed experience.
Most of the children she evacuated were Amerasian, which means they were half American and half Asian, which at that time was not a good thing.
We were told then they would not have survived there. And had they at all, they would have been very second-class citizens. They would never have been given a legal name or been married or been funded or been, we were told, not cared for. So indeed their lives were very different. It's truly a privilege. I mean that.
Oh, yeah. You'd have to.
I often say of all the people God picked to do that,
I know,
how lucky I am that He picked me. And when I went to Vietnam, I thought I was making a little difference, you know, bringing out 6 babies. But very often what we do has much bigger ramifications than anything we would even know about. Had I not gone to that reunion, I would never have known the lives I helped touch. And I encourage everybody that no effort is too small. Everything you do has benefits and effects far beyond your knowledge or comprehension, because no effort is too small. You don't have to go to Vietnam or rescue babies in cardboard boxes to make a difference in the world. And every woman does, every person can. Amazing adventure to this day. I'm still living it out.
In 2008, Leanne was one of only 5 people out of 4,000 professional speakers inducted into the Speaker Hall of Fame. If you have a story you'd like to submit, go to chickensoupforthesoul.com and type your story in the space provided. If you know someone who has a successful, inspirational, or motivational story to tell, well, we want to know about it too. We've made it very easy for you to tell us. You can go to one of these websites, or you can contact us through Facebook, Twitter, or you can even send us a letter. Be sure to give us a name, a number where we can reach them, and tell us what they're doing that you think makes them so special.